Hello and welcome to the build video for WoodfathersJig. First off, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's watching this video because it means that you bought the plans. I really appreciate it. You buying the plans helps me justify having the YouTube channel and the website, so thank you very much. Now, as for the plans themselves, you may have noticed by now that there's no measurements in them. This is not me being lazy, this is on purpose. There's nothing in the jig that is so critical that you need to know the exact measurement. All you have to do is build it so that it suits the scrap wood that you've got in your workshop and so that it suits the table saw that you're going to use it on. Once you've seen the jig in action a couple of times and you understand the different components and what they're there for, you'll be able to build the jig without having any actual detailed measurements yourself. To prove that point, I've got two very different looking versions of the jig. This one I made a few months back and I've been using it for a while, and this one I've built for this video. This one's from a sheet of form ply that I bought. This one's from scrap wood, but they both work in the same manner. Now, if you're out in the workshop building this one, I estimate it should take you around about 2 to 4 hours, depending on how many distractions and coffee breaks you have in between. But it's quite a simple build, so you should be able to build and use it in the one day. Now, the only thing I'll mention about the build process is to not get too discouraged when you get to the end, you make your first joint and you find that it hasn't gone together perfectly. It will take a little bit of trial and error at the start. Your key might be too big, your key might be too thin, your clamping mechanism may not be adequate enough and your wood might be tilting to the side, that sort of thing. It'll take a couple of tries to get it working perfectly, but then once you've got it set up, it's set up for life. Well, it's set up for life with that blade. If you ever change blades, you'll need to change your front fence as well. But once you've got it done, you can knock out these joints in about 2 minutes on the table saw. So it's definitely well worth it. Don't get discouraged. If something does go wrong and you can't figure out what it is, just hit me up. I'm more than happy to help you out. And with that all said, let's get into the build. The first step is about as easy as it gets. All you need to do is cut your base, a couple of runners, and then attach them all together. Now, my base is about 350 by 370, but it really doesn't matter. Just go for something in that ballpark. Once the rails are secure, you can trim the ends off. If your base is as large as mine, you don't need the extra length. And finally, to complete the base, make a cut just over halfway through. The next part of the jig to build is the platform. The main part of the platform is an offcut of 2x4. Then I've got 2 squares with one corner notched off, and that's just for looks because it's a very attractive jig. They get placed like this so that they're all flush across the front there. And then we've got the main fence, which is also cut from the form ply, and that attaches to it as well. I've also cut a strip of hardwood, which is optional, but I'm going to use this to put on the top of my fence and glue it on there. And that means that when I slide things back and forth, I'll be able to sand this nice and smooth and probably even polish it so that way the sliding motion's nice and slick. I find that if you're just doing it straight on plywood or on MDF, it can be a little bit stiff. It just means it'll be a little bit easier to use if you've got something smooth up the top there. You certainly can do without it and just cut the front fence a little bit taller. It's easier to add the hardwood trim to the front fence before you attach it to the platform. Just make sure that you trim that hardwood to be the same thickness as the front fence and you shouldn't run into any issues. While that's drying up, you can put the platform together. Regardless of whether you use form ply or regular wood, glue is not good enough for this joint. You're going to end up putting a lot of pressure against these sides, so put glue and a couple of longer screws in on both sides. In case you're wondering, I bought about 50 of these drill bits for a few dollars from China, and my God, can you tell? They're crap. I'm going to throw them away after this. Now, you may be wondering why the plans mention a star knob, and yet I'm not installing one here. Hopefully this will explain things. This is the original jig that I made years ago. This is the one that I made recently and that I've been using lately. The main difference between these two is the way these template fingers are attached, or the way that they're fixed in place. So on the original one, I've got my fingers over here, and then on this side I have pretty much just cut pieces of wood and jammed them in there so that these can't move back and forth. For this one, I thought I might do something a little bit more advanced, so I've got an insert thread going through this side piece, and then I've got a star knob with a bolt, and when I tighten this, it pushes everything over that way. It works just as well. However, but it's a little bit more fiddly to go and install it and set it up, and it doesn't add a whole lot to the project. So while it's useful and helpful, certainly you might want to do it. But for the one that I'm building right now, I'm going to go back the old way and use wedges again. So I'm just saying, if you wanted to do the start knob, you'd probably want to do that at this stage, or even before you attach the sides to that little platform piece. Either way works. This looks nicer. This is easier. Simple as that. My front fence is glued up, so I've marked out where I want to put screws, and I'm going to drill them on here. Simply because my crappy Chinese drill bits won't work very well in the hand drill. With those pilot holes drilled and countersunk, you can go ahead and clamp the front fence to the platform and then screw it all in together. If you're using plywood or MDF, you probably won't need to use screws all over the place like I am. If you do use screws though, make sure you remember that the blade is going to go somewhere around here, so make sure there's no screws in the path of the blade. Alright, just about time to attach the platform to the base. When you're doing this, a good rule of thumb is roughly 100 to 110 mil. And if you do that, that means you'll easily be able to put 4 of your workpieces here. So you'll be able to cut 4 sides of a box at once if that's what you want to do. So I'll go 110 here, 110, beautiful. I know this is square with the blade, so everything should be nice and tight now. Once again, I can't glue because I've got the form ply. So I've got 2 screws here. If I drive these flush to the top of my 2x4, I know that they'll be sticking into the bottom, and it'll be enough that I'll be able to turn it upside down and fix it from underneath. So let's drive these in. Now I've got 1 screw in, it can still pivot, so I'm just going to double check that I'm in the right spot. That's about as good as I'll ever get to perfect. Alright, that is pretty good. Now you can flip the jig over and properly affix the platform to the base with some more countersunk screws. You can see I stopped using the Chinese drill bits. Now, as you're using this jig and pushing it back and forth, the blade eventually is going to poke out here slightly. So to take care of that, we have a blade guard, which all it is just a block of pine. It's basically just going to sit like that. If you can't see your curve, figure out where it is and then just extend it and make sure, well, you may not be able to see that on the form ply, but there's a nice straight line there. So now I can make sure that I can put the blade guard straight on top of that, and I'm not going to put any screws in the way of the kerf. I might actually bring it up there as well. So with the main part of the jig built, it's time to make the fingers or the template for it. So I've got 3 different thicknesses of plywood here that I'm going to use. It doesn't have to be plywood, just get something that's going to be flat and stable. It's not going to warp, and it's always going to be the same thickness all year round. And the reason I've got 3 different thicknesses here is so that I can make box joints that are 16 mil thick, or 12 mil thick, or 9 mil thick. And if you want different sizes, just get different material. Fairly easy. And with those finger templates cut up, you can position them on the platform. There's nothing to it, just stack them up and flip every second one so as to define your cutting template. So like I mentioned earlier, in the plans I put a knob on the side here which I tighten up, which squeezes everything over. That works really well. It looks nice, but to be quite honest, this is just so easy that you may as well just do it this way. This is the fence for the sliding rail. I cut it out of melamine simply because that's what I've got. So why not use it? Hey, it's nice and flat. It's going to stay nice and flat. So I'm happy with that. This is what the fence starts off looking like. And this is one that I've been using for a little while. The main difference on this one, you can see there's a couple of holes here, and I've done that so that I can put clamps through it. So when I'm cutting, I don't have to hold the wood. I can just clamp it in there. You could go through and cut that right now, but I find it easier to do once everything's all assembled. Once you've got the back on the fence and you've got this little side piece on it. Once you've got all that done, then it's easier to come back and just with your jigsaw or a drill, cut out a couple of notches so that you can get your clamps in there. So for now, this part's done. The next thing we need to make is what I've called this L rail here. It goes on the back of the sliding fence, and effectively it goes on the fence and hooks over so that it hooks on top of this piece of hardwood here. And that's going to give you your sliding action, and it's going to make sure that it can never tip forward or flip in any other manner, basically. So that's what we need to make now. All right, I think the profile view will help. So here's my sliding fence. Here's the rail that I need to create that L-shaped piece of wood for. And here's my 2x4, which is what I'm going to create the L shape from. I'm using a 2x4 because I have it. I'd prefer to use hardwood, but quite frankly, I don't have any scraps that are the right length and I don't want to cut up anything nice for it. So 2x4 is going to work perfectly fine for me. Press it up against it, mark the height and put it on there, and then put it up on top of that rail and mark the width of it. So now you can see I've just got to cut out that channel all the way along, and then that'll be able to slide right over on top of that, and we can screw it onto this. It's almost time to attach the L rail to the front fence, but before I do that, I want to drill a hole over here on the right hand side for my key to fit into. The reason I want to drill that hole first is because it needs to be a square hole, 90 degrees, and if this is attached to it, it can be a little bit hard to get the drill in. So I'm going to do that on the drill press. Now, I'm going to use a drill bit for my key, and I know that it's going to work perfectly as I've used this same drill bit on previous versions of the jig before. So here I'm drilling a hole which is slightly undersized for my key, and I'm doing this to make sure that the hole is perfectly square. Now I've mounted my actual key in this drill so I can drive it into the hole. Once I reach the depth that I want, I can just unchuck it by hand and my key is now perfectly secure. And this is how it eventually is going to work. So now it's time to mount the rail. To get it the right height, I'm going to lift up the front fence just slightly, just so that when I'm using this jig, it's not actually dragging on the base. It's going to be just a millimetre higher or so. Then we get the back piece, put it against here, and mark a line. If I take that off and then mark another line, I can drill some holes through here, and then I can fix a couple of screws from the front to attach the rail to this. Because this is going to be the front of the fence, you don't want to have any screws sticking out, so I'm just going to chamfer them. And now we can mount the L rail to the front fence with our key in it. With this part of the jig, expect to have to make it a couple of times. It's unlikely that your very first key attempt will be the perfect fit. That's a good reason to use screws instead of glue, as it makes it easier to trial different keys in the same piece. This is one of the reasons why I recommend making it out of scrap wood as well. So I hope you're getting excited now because we're almost at the end of this build. The base is pretty much all done. We've just got to put one more piece on the sliding fence, and what that is the fence stop, which will be what we butt our workpieces up against to. And now I need to make a single kerf cut, and that's going to tell me exactly where on here I need to put the fence stop in. So just to be really clear, I'm going to put the key in the very first cavity all the way over on the right hand side and then push it over to the right. I've raised the blade up so it's going to cut into the fence, and then I'm going to make my cut and pull it back out. I'm only going to cut enough that it goes into the fence. There's no need there's no need for this cut to go all the way through the piece. It's just going into the fence. All right, so if we pretend that this is our workpiece and that this is our fence stop, we want the fence stop to be on the right-hand side of the kerf so that the fence stop never gets cut by the blade, but so that when you put the workpiece in, it might be a little bit hard to see, but this part here is going to get nibbled away and this should never ever be touched. So all we really want to do here is go on the right-hand side of this kerf and bring that line up. And now we want to mount our fence stop on that line. There's that line. Here's my fence stop. And I just want to make sure that it's perfectly square on the edge of that kerf. So ideally, the fence stop will never ever be cut into by the blade, if you've got it in the right spot. So now I'm just going to clamp it in and then screw it from the back. This part is quite important, so make sure you're nice and square. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but I've got it upside down. The fence stop is under here, running straight this way. So I'm just going to put a couple of screws through from here. Now we're just about there. All right, we are just about ready for our very first cut. So this is how we set it up. Get your jig, slide it up so it's next to the blade, get your workpiece, lie it down on top of the base. Now you want to raise the blade until it's at the thickness of your workpiece. If you want your fingers to extend beyond the workpiece, just raise your blade up a little bit higher. I'm going to go, it's probably, I think the blade is around about 1/2 mil on top of my workpiece here. So that's good for me. Get your first workpiece, drop it all the way over to the left-hand side. Make sure there's no splinters on the bottom that are going to force it out of square. First workpiece all the way over. The fingers that I've got at the back in the template here are made out of this exact material, so it's the exact width. Get that and tuck it in there, and then get your next workpiece and back it over here. So now you want to clamp it so that everything is pressed squarely over to this fence stop, and also that it's pressed back here towards the base so that there's no chance it can rock left and right. Having this piece, if I leave it all the way down the bottom, then the blade's going to cut into it. It's not the end of the world because it is a sacrificial piece, but if I lift it up, I don't have to worry about the blade cutting it, and it'll last for a little bit longer. Okay, I think we're good to go. When you're using the jig, go slow. There's no benefit to rushing at all. You want to make sure that the workpieces are very secure. If they wobble or angle to the side, your joints won't work out. I recommend that you first cut the right-hand side of each finger, then the left. Then you can nibble away at everything left over in the middle. If you cut simply from right to left, then that last cut is going to end up deflecting slightly, as it's only going to be cutting into wood on 1/2 of the blade. And you'll find that if you do that, your joints just won't fit together as well as they should. Minor thing, but it does help. All right, let's see how we went. In theory, we just go like this, and there we go. This wood, as you can see, is extremely splintery, so I probably should have used a backing board there, but that doesn't bother me too much. I'll just put it that way and then you can't see it. So that, after one attempt, I'm more than happy with this. I think all I need to do is put some glue in there, clamp it up, and it'll be a really nice tight joint. I've got probably just a fraction of a millimetre more gap than I would like to have, but I think that's because when I went through before and I said that I'm just going to jam the blocks in there, I haven't jammed them in super tight. I just did it quick and then walked away, and looking at it now, if I put a little bit of force against it, I can see that they move just a fraction of a millimetre, and that's why I've got a tiny bit more gap than I actually want. But All I need to do there is make sure that I wedge these parts in really, really tightly, and that won't be a problem on the next cut. Now, because I've made this before and I've used this actual key with this blade before, I was quite confident that things were going to work out well. I'm not going to change the key, I'll just fix up the sloppiness that I've got in the fingers there, and everything will be fine for my one. However, when you make your one, because it's the very first time you've used a key and a blade, you might find that your joints don't go together or they're super loose. If you make your first cut, you bring your pieces together and they don't actually go in because they're too tight, that means that your key is too wide. The blade's not been able to travel over as far as it needs to because the key is stopping it. So what you need to do is either find something a little bit thinner or take a file and file down one side of it just a little bit. So whatever you change on the key is going to transfer twice to each joint. So it really adds up. So make sure you only make tiny, tiny adjustments, then make a new cut, test it out and see how you go again. If, on the other hand, you put it in and it's just crazy loose and it's slop all over the place, your key's too thin and you just need something a little bit thicker. So same sort of thing, you'll have to find something a fraction thicker, test it out and see how you go. So there you go guys, I hope that this video has helped and it's made it easier for you to understand how to build your own version of this jig. I think between this video and the original one that I posted, that pretty much every question you would have around building this jig should be answered. But if not, if there's something that I haven't explained properly and you need some further help with, just email me, contact me through Instagram or something like that, and I'm more than happy to help. So once again guys, thank you so much for buying these plans. I really do appreciate it. Happy box making.